driven by the wisdom of the communities most impacted by systemic abuse. And we know very well, as defense lawyers, that the use of force, whether justified or not in individual cases, is systemically problematic. We are tired of new hashtags every day. We are tired of a new injustice every hour. Because George Floyd's life mattered. Breonna Taylor's life mattered. Sean Monterosa's life mattered. Because Willie McCoy's life mattered. Ahmaud Arbery, who although wasn't killed by law enforcement, was a victim of racist, unjustified violence, and his life mattered. Philando Castile, his life mattered. Tamir Rice, his life mattered. Stephon Clark, his life mattered. Sandra Bland, her life mattered. The life of our clients matters. We know the indignities our clients have suffered, not just at the hands of police, but at the hands of the criminal justice system. And we are here to say that protesting works, organizing works, mobilizing works. Changes are occurring because people are taking it to the streets. Within 10 days of sustained protests, Minneapolis bans use of chokeholds. Charges were upgraded against the officer who killed Mr. Floyd, and the other officers involved are arrested and charged. In Maryland, a bipartisan work group of state lawmakers announced a police reform work group. Los Angeles City Council introduced a motion to reduce the LAPD's $1.8 billion operating budget. And even the street in front of the White House has now been renamed Black Lives Matter Plaza. And in Solano County, the Department of Justice is now investigating the Vallejo Police Department based on their history of fatalities, as residents have complained for years of a wide pattern of excessive force and overly aggressive policing.
That's right. Yeah.
And it is up to all of us to ensure we hold officers accountable in our communities. Now is the time that we organize and mobilize. Now is the time to demand that we do better. We are proud to stand with our public defender family, defense bar, residents of Solano County, and allies to build community around issues that impact our clients and all of us. Now we're going to hear a few words from the public defender of Solano County, Elena DeAugustino.
Enough is enough. We have lost too many people of color at the hands of the people who are supposed to protect them. Okay. We have lost too many people of color at the hands of those who are supposed to protect them. My heart breaks for them, for their families, for their communities. We have all failed them. As public defenders, we have been on the ground seeing the injustice through the eyes of our clients for years, hearing from them about violence perpetrated against them by the same officers, year after year, day after day. The bad apples have been protected by their colleagues, and there has been institutional failure to rein them in. When the people of the community cannot trust the police to keep them safe, nobody is safe. It harms everybody. As a Gen Xer, you think about what Shelley just said, I've always been really skeptical about the power of protest to make lasting change. I grew up in the wake of the 60s, where years and years and years of protests failed to have any impact on the Vietnam War. And while we had the Civil Rights Act passed, it was followed almost immediately by the war on drugs, which has caused so much harm to communities of color. And in recent years, I found myself doubting Dr. King when he said that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. But things are different now, and change is coming. Real change is coming. The prevalence of video recordings has gradually opened the eyes of Americans to what we as public defenders have known for years. The killing of George Floyd has unleashed an outpouring of support.
Right.
Was the alleged use of a forged $20 bill an important enough crime to justify an immediate arrest with such force that he was killed lying in the street?
No.
Change can happen. We're seeing it now. We've seen it in other cities, and hopefully change is coming here. But all of this means we need to fundamentally reevaluate how we in our society, police, decide to prosecute crimes, decide what level of force is appropriate, what crimes justify being arrested versus being diverted or not being brought to court at all. We need to figure out what is the effectiveness of the system we have today and how can we build one that truly makes everyone safer. So I am here today to support the push, to help the push for real change with our system, and I'm very confident that we will now be able to start seeing true reform in our country.
Now we'll hear from Tommy Barrett from the Alternate Defender's Office.
Let's not forget about Eric Reason Jr.
That's right. That's right.
Ever since May 29th, when George Floyd was killed, and protests have broken out across this country and have picked up steam, and you see protests in places you've never seen before, people are saying, this time it's going to be different. I hope that's true. I hope we're not back here in 5 years like we were in 2014, protesting then. What is not new is the long history of violence by law enforcement against African American people and people of color.
Right.
The main thing, not the only thing, but the main thing different this time is, at least in the cases of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, they were caught on camera.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those explanations that the prosecuting authorities rely on to not file charges, to say the stuff was justified, the officer was threatened, the person was resisting, they had no choice but to end their life. You can't tell those lies when it's caught on camera. Will things be different this time? And if not now, when? The city in which we all gather here today has its own long and recent history of police violence against African Americans and people of color.
Yes.
Since 2011 alone, and I know there's folks out here that'll go back further than that, and please do, but since 2011 alone, the Vallejo Police Department has killed 17 people in this community. They've engaged in countless acts of excessive force, and not a single prosecution, not a single criminal charge has ever been filed for excessive force or the killing of these individuals. For an officer who kills someone in Vallejo, and this is just fact, this is not opinion, you're more likely to be promoted than prosecuted. Are we going to be back here in 3 months or 6 months when the chief law enforcement officer of Solano County has completed their review and told us that they had no choice, they had to kill Sean Monterosa?
No, they didn't.
Will things be different this time?
We hope so.
If not now, when?
Video.
Think about for a moment these 17 people who were killed, the families of these 17 people who were killed. Brian Stevenson tells us that the opposite of justice is not injustice, it's hopelessness. Every one of those people who were killed, someone's son, someone's brother, someone's nephew, someone's grandson, in some cases someone's father, someone's uncle.
That's right. That's right.
Their death, just like any other human being, ripped a gaping hole in the lives of their family and friends. An open wound.
Amen. Talk to me, brother.
An open wound that still exists.
Sick.
Their lives mattered, and their deaths matter too. And then their families and loved ones come to the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of Solano County, no matter who's headed up that office, and they make the most simple request, the most basic form of justice and accountability, a day in court. They want a day in court for the person who indisputably killed their loved one. These are not whodunits. These are not. They want a day in court, a public trial, in front of 12 people that are drawn from a fair cross-section of the community, where those 12 people get to hear all the evidence, get to hear all the argument, and they decide, they find the facts, whether it was justified or not. Let the community be the fact finders.
Yes. Yes.
Not the city. But time and time and time again, no matter who heads up the office and no matter what the circumstances are, the answer is always the same. No. No. Not for you. Not for you and your family. These doors, they're closed to you of this criminal justice system. No matter what the circumstances, no matter if their child was unarmed, no matter if their child did not actually threaten the police with deadly force, no matter if their child was running away when they were shot, no matter if their child was sleeping just seconds before they were shot. No matter if their hands were up and they were kneeling, no matter if they were shot in the back, no matter what. If a police officer did it, the laws do not apply to them. And this criminal justice system, it ain't available to you.
Praise God. Amen.
Will it be different this time?
No.
If not, when?
Never. No.
Late last week, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the state of California announced that they're going to be conducting a, quote, expansive review of the Vallejo Police Department to reform its policies and practices to build trust in the community. Well, y'all are more hopeful than me because I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. You know, there can be no meaningful reform until there's accountability. I'm all for better practices, but who's holding them accountable to those practices? Their bosses? Their close allies in the district attorney's office? I have a policy change for you. How about this? Equal justice under the laws. How's that for a new policy? Until it is clear, based on action and not words, that law enforcement officers will no longer be exempted from the same laws that apply to every one of us here today. Until that time comes, there can be no true reform and justice. Let a jury decide. Let a jury decide whether the facts and whether the officer's actions using deadly force were warranted. Any reform has to include accountability.
Amen.
The time for accountability is now.
Now.
No longer should the people with the most training in the use of deadly force be held to the lowest standard. No longer can the use of deadly force be the first option and not the last resort. No longer can the chief law enforcement officer of this county and of this state be allowed to categorically and systematically close the doors to the criminal justice system, to police violence.
Will you marry me?
If not now, when? When? Thank you.
I'd like to call up Tamani Taylor, one of our chief public defenders.
I'd just like to say it's so wonderful to see so many people out here in protest of police violence and the murderous act of local and nationwide police forces. I don't have a written speech. I felt it was better to speak from the heart as a person of color, as a black woman, as the daughter of a black man, as the wife of a black husband, as the sister of black brothers, and as the aunt of black nephews. I can tell you this, I don't know what they're experiencing now, those black men in my life that are so very close to me. I don't know what they're going through, but what I can tell you is what I go through in being so close to them. I can tell you my story, and I can talk to you about my fear. And let me tell you something about my fear. When my husband walks out the door every day, a sense of fear and panic overwhelm me until he walks back in that door. And let me tell you something, if he's gone and the doorbell rings, before I look through that peephole, I pray to God it's not a death notification. And when I get a phone call from a family member, my sister-in-law or my other sister-in-law or my brother or anybody else, I think, please God, don't let them be calling me to tell me that it's a death notification. So I say that because that's the fear I live in. And some people out there who don't understand the fear I live in because they're not as closely connected to black men as I am, might say I'm paranoid. They might say I'm irrational, and they might say that fear is unreal. Sometimes I question my own fear as being those things. Are you just being paranoid? Are you just being irrational? But when I hear stories about a woman asleep in her bed in between shifts as an EMT, getting murdered in her sleep, that fear that I feel is not paranoia, it's not irrational, it is very real. And when a young man is jogging in his neighborhood and is tracked down and trapped and murdered, that story, when I come across that story, that makes my fear real and rational and not paranoid. And when I hear and I come across a story of a black man who is murdered in broad daylight on a busy street in front of a crowd over $20, that makes my fear real and rational. So don't tell me it's not. And when I hear about a young man in my own county that I've lived in for 30 years, Sean Monterosa, being gunned down, shot 5 times while surrendering peacefully on, at most, a property crime, being murdered, that makes my fear reasonable, rational, and real.
No justice.
Let me tell you something about living in fear. It prevents you from living free. And so every day I live in fear. Every day my black brothers and sisters live in fear. And they don't live free. And that's a promise the country made, was that we would be able to live free. And through systemic racism that's ordained by county officials and city officials, nationwide officials, it prevents a whole segment of the nation from living free. Free cannot exist where fear does. Now, some people might say, well, it's a complicated situation. It's hard to resolve. Man, you can't, it's not overnight. Let me tell you something. I'm going to do this by analogy, and then I'll bring it back. If I have a basket of apples, and I look in my basket of apples, and there's one rotten apple on top. If I take that apple and I throw it away, what am I left with?
Good apple.
Basket of good apples. Let's say I have that same basket of apples, and I look in it and I see a rotten apple. and I take that rotten apple and I bury it at the bottom of the basket. And all of its rot and toxicity bleeds into all the good apples. What am I left with? What am I left with in my basket? A basket of what?
Apples. That's right.
Amen?
Amen.
So when a police department covers up, lies about what an officer did and tries to justify and then close ranks around us in this thin blue line, you know what happens to any good officers that are in that precinct or department?
All of that.
They get rotten.
Every last one of them.
But guess what? Do you know what the answer is? If you take clear and decisive action on that officer and you're transparent and you remove that officer, they can't infect and invade the good officers. And what does that do to the public? What does that do to the public? It gives the public respect and confidence in their system. And we're not at war with the police. Right now, black and brown people and those that are in the struggle with us, we're at war with police departments. That is not the function of a police department. But if you can get rid of the bad or the bad apples in your precinct, in your department, in that department, then you're left with good officers and a healthy relationship with the community they serve. Thank you.
Hi, y'all. I'm an Indian, and Indian lives matter too.
Yeah, they do.
All lives matter.
Okay.
And if you don't care nothing about your own family, then stay the fuck out of mine.
No.
Peace in the hood. Hood in the hood. Can I get a hand clap? Ain't no real Indians in this town but me. Ain't none.
All right.
And I'm out here by myself.
All right.
All night, all day. Don't nobody like me because they shooting bow arrows at me. But guess what? All lives matter. Because it conflicts the whole family when they lose one. Get on your knees and start praying and ask the Lord Jesus, if you're a believer, are you serving the devil? Then get the hell out of the way. Peace in the hood.
Peace in the hood.
And I ain't playing either.
Hi, my name is Courtney Reed. I'm the attorney with the Alternate Defender's Office. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out today in support of Black Lives. And I wanted to say that I feel really encouraged by all the people all around the world, all the photos that I've been seeing of people mobilized and energized for this movement. But I want to talk about something a little different. A lot of friends and family have asked me what I think they can do personally right now. And I think voting is important, supporting black businesses is important, but here's what I would say to that. I would say that the biggest thing you can do, that we can do, is educate ourselves. Talk to your kids about race. If you're not sure how to do that, there's a really good book out there called Black is a Rainbow Color. It's a children's book. Because the kids are the ones that are going to grow up and they're going to take their knowledge with them into the ballot booth, and we're going to start seeing systemic change. Those of you out there, How to Educate Yourselves is a really good book. How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. That's a place to start, because I feel like what we're not talking about is why these things are happening. Why do we have a social, historic association between blackness and criminality? Why is there an assumption that people like my father, black men, our brothers and sisters, are dangerous and that they need to be controlled? That's what we're not talking about. As a nation, we have a lot of soul searching to do. We have to take a good long look in the mirror and think about the ways in which we are susceptible to implicit bias in this country and what we can do to decolonize our own minds. So I just wanted to say that thank you to everybody for coming out to support us, to fighting the good fight, and always keep truth to power.
Can I call up Amira Cobb Hampton?
I'll ask Ms. Jacobs and Mr. Madden to join me.
Yeah. There you go.
done today, and has been done across the world in almost every country, we will ask you to take a knee in honor of the life unjustly taken of Mr. George Floyd. We'll be kneeling for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the same amount of time that it took for the breath to leave his body. While we are kneeling, Mr. Madden and Ms. Jacobs have not forgot about the people who have lost their lives in Vallejo and in Solano County, and they will be reading those names. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if anybody cannot take a knee, you can raise your fist.
And real quick before we begin, I just wanted to note that the list that we're working off today was put together by Open Vallejo, which is an independent, nonpartisan public interest newsroom, and it's admittedly a work in progress. All right.
Charles Lee Davis.
Marwin Prado.
Jose Pascua Ortiz.
Jason Sabay.
Christopher Brown.
Kevin LaRon Smith.
Roylan Ophelis Tagude.
Timoteo Diaz.
Floyd Nehemiah Strong.
Andrew Lamar Washington.
Cesar Baguio.
Otis Edward McPeters.
Douglas Lawrence Hahn.
Stephen Wilson Jr.
Fonotaga Tilly Jr.
Charles Christopher Gordon.
Eric Thomas Walters.
Michael Todd White.
Guy Jerome Giroux Jr.
Sherman Peacock.
Peter Messler.
Anton Barrett Sr.
Jared Huey.
Marshall Tobin.
Mario Romero.
Jeremiah Moore.
William Hines.
Timothy Walker.
Mohammed Naz.
Ever Ramon Martinez.
Philip Conley.
Angel Ramos.
Jeffrey Barboa.
Ronell Foster.
Willie McCoy.
Eric Reason.
Sean Monterosa.
Thank you all.
just want to thank everyone for being here today, for coming out and making the time. Please stay healthy, stay safe, and please stay vigilant for one another. Thank you.
Look at the courts, look at the district attorneys, look at the police, and tell them these are our streets. Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No racist! No peace! No racist! Police! The people united will never be divided! The people united will never be divided! The people united will never be divided! Thank you! There's collateral damages associated with peaceful protest. And I want to recognize 2 lawyers who have volunteered their time, energy, and services to work pro bono for any protester out there who is protesting peacefully. I want to recognize attorney Micah Thompson. If you come up. And Ms. Whittaker, if you come up. So these 2 courageous black women, and there are 2 others. There's La Teresa Graves, and who's out of Oakland, and we also have Jason Ross. So if you know of individuals who've been wrongfully arrested and detained, my office is right across the street. We're representing folks free, pro bono. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.